right, yeah, please welcome Mr. Jim White from Deck, and he's going to be talking about Android Lollipop and what's for developers.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for spending what is probably an abnormally nice day in the spring, late in the afternoon, listening to some guy babble on about Android Lollipop. So hopefully I'll give you some reason to stay awake and maybe leave with something in your pocket here. In fact, what we're going to look at here over the next hour, is it dim enough? Can everybody see that okay? Yeah, slides are I know a bit dark if you can't. Okay. There are a lot of things in Android Lollipop. If you haven't had, how many people have actually, how many people are Android developers, first of all? Okay, so everybody's. How many people have started to look at Lollipop? A couple? Anybody developed an app yet in Lollipop? One? Okay, so perfect suited audience. People who know Android but have not yet started to experiment with Lollipop. There's a lot in there, and so we won't be able to cover everything in this short amount of time. What I want to try and do is give you some highlights. There is small bits of code in there, but really the only parts of the code that I'm showing you are the pieces that will at least give you an appreciation that, hey, that doesn't look too hard. Or, oh my gosh, that looks impossible. So at least give you some flavor of what the new APIs are going to start to look like that you'll get a chance to work with. So if you have read, heard, or seen anything about Lollipop, you've probably heard about material design. Yes? Yeah, that's a big part of it. We'll talk about what that is. I'm not a big fan of the marketing department here at Google. I'm not sure I knew exactly what material design is when I first heard about it. Maybe you do. I'll try to help define what that is and how it's going to impact us, not only in Android, but lots of areas. We will take a look then also at Project Volta. Power savings, battery savings. That is a big feature of Lollipop. We'll take a look at notifications, some big additions there. Not only in how they are displayed or what they display, but certainly in the interactions and what they can do for users if so desired. We'll talk a little bit about the setup for that. Then a lot of other additional APIs, features, if you will. We'll talk about things like new WebView, Bluetooth LE, lots and lots of other smaller pieces that we'll kind of mention before we get out of here. A couple of other pieces that aren't really part of what are called Lollipop, but you might want to be aware of. New development tools and environments. How many people still develop with Eclipse? Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? A year ago, if you were all Android developers, how many people a year ago were developing with Eclipse? There you go. In fact, I was, if I had a bet on Wall Street or any place else about how fast we would be now using Android Studio, I would have lost it several times over. In fact, I was telling clients a year ago, don't worry about it, it's going to take a while. And now we're all using Android Studio. But there are a couple other things you should know about in the development environment that are now there or to be used as well. And we will talk a little bit about some things that users will notice. This is going to be an interesting release, or is an interesting release, in that this is not only a lot of new stuff for us as developers to have to worry about and work with and use and take advantage of. Users will actually see quite a few additions as well that you may or may not have to worry about putting into your applications. It's just there, and things that they're going to see on their devices that will be enticements to have them actually go out and buy new systems or take advantage of new features, new apps, things of that nature we'll want to chat about. So my goal here is to have you leave here after this hour, maybe giving you a reason to start to work with Lollipop. It's actually fairly simple to get going in it. In fact, I'm working on with a client right now building an application that they decided they want this app to be Lollipop ready, and it's actually not too bad to start thinking about that. Or maybe at the very least, ask your significant other, chief of staff, that you would like to buy a new device or get a new device here pretty shortly. In fact, I know I still carry around my old Android device. It's got the crack on the window and everything because I'm waiting for the new Android 5 devices. So maybe you will find yourself in that same position. Okay, so first off, material design. Here's some definitions that you will find either on the Google website or on some of the other literature that's out there. I'll let you kind of read through that here for a second. Does anybody really knows what's the essence of that? When I read it, I was like, no help from me there. I mean, when I looked at that at first glance, I thought, well, okay, I understand a lot of Google is going in the marketing direction, trying to advertise a lot of these products and get them out there on the street, but those definitions didn't really help me as a developer understand, well, how's that change my world? How does it change the apps that I'm building? Let me help you understand what that material design means from a ground level, from a developer's perspective. Material design is a lot of things. New themes, styles, if you will. That's usually something that's been associated with almost all the major releases that Android has had. New widget sets, we'll talk about those and see some of those. In fact, I think there was a talk earlier this morning on RecyclerView, CardView, and if you had a chance to attend that, you have some of those, some appreciation of those. Elevations and shadows, clippings, vector drawables, animations. Yep, material design is all about the display and really trying to, I'm going to be really careful here for those who are fans of iOS. Who are not fans of iOS, I don't want to, to make this a religious war or religious discussion even, but certainly one of the criticisms of Android in the past has been, while we have had a way to get apps out and we can do all sorts of exciting things with our apps, and devices may have even had more peripherals than, say, the iOS community, UI is where we have been lacking. And this release has certainly been meant to try and address that and to try to put together some design principles from people who really do know UI, UX design and can help us as developers really give our apps that shot at competing in a global marketplace of all sorts of devices that may have some better blitz than our Android platform. So it's really helped to try to address some of those deficiencies. I'll let you judge in the end whether or not that's the case or not, but that is part of what material design is all about. So we'll take a look at these features, and you'll see that in some cases, as a developer, pretty darn easy to take advantage of these. In some cases, a little bit more difficult. Some of the features, things like RecyclerView, CardView, will also help improve things like performance at the same time, so you get a double win. So lots of capability that offers all sorts of things outside of the UI area as well. So as I mentioned, new theme, and this is actually, if you go to your AVD, or if you are lucky enough to have an Android 5 device or something, there are always those API demos you can pull up. These are actually the API demo apps that are right there on the AVDs, for example. And you can see on the, what would be your left there, the material light theme. Yes, there is also a material dark theme, but the material light theme compared to our old, good old-fashioned hello light theme. And you will see, there are some subtle differences and some not so subtle differences. I always think it's interesting that, anybody do iOS development as well? Does that look familiar? The old switch buttons, or whatever you want to call them, Rio buttons, whatever you want to call those, but it's starting to look an awful lot alike at this point, aren't they? But there are some other changes that are out there that go beyond just this one screen. But you will see maybe what I would call some iOS-like features in the new material design, as opposed to our old Polo design. Whether you like that or not, I'll let that be your opinion, but it is what we're going to be living with here in the not too distant future. Again, new widgets. If you were again at the earlier session, I apologize, I don't want to be redundant, and we won't do a lot of code or taking a look at a lot of the details of these particular features, but as just an example, RecyclerView here, I wrote a little tiny app, and it's actually one that's out there on the Intertech blog site. Just gets a collection of stock prices and throws out those into this RecyclerView. We'll talk about what's some of the better features of the RecyclerView. Why do we have RecyclerView? What is the RecyclerView here in just a second? But if you're thinking, smells like what I used to do in a list view, you would not be wrong. If it looks like it's nothing more than a replacement for a list view, well, to some degree you're right there as well. There are also some additional features we'll talk about. CardView essentially is just a row in what you would have placed in a list view in the past, but with some additional capability we'll talk about there. For example, you can probably start to see the rounding of the edges, some lift off the page, elevation. Again, these are features as part of material design. We'll talk about what a card view represents, and again, where its place in the widget kit, if you will, from Android is in just a second. So let me start by talking first of all about the RecyclerView as one of these new widgets is in the material design. The material set that we get from Android. The more advanced and flexible version of ListView. In fact, Chet Haas, who is from Google and was in charge of the material design part of Android, was speaking at a conference I was at a few months back, and he called it ListView 2. So that should give you a pretty good appreciation that yes, this indeed was the way probably ListView may have or should have been built back when it was first created. In that it is, yes, a way to display lots of data in kind of a row, column type of mechanism, but it's much more efficient, especially when we're talking about larger data sets. When we were talking about dynamic changes of the data behind that data set, if anybody's had to build the list view and had to deal with large data sets, where all of a sudden you are blowing out the number of widgets you have in terms of memory, and you're having to figure out, well, maybe how should I reuse, the widgets at index I for when the user, slides all the rows down, and now I'm dealing with the 10,000 row or something. How should I do that in an efficient way? Thankfully the RecyclerView is going to save you a lot of heartache there, because it's going to take care of those problems for you, at least take care of most of those problems for you. There'll be a little bit of a complexity cost that we'll talk about here in a second, but it certainly is going to take care of larger and dynamic data sets that are changing. Did you ever have a case where you were dealing with ListView, where the back-end data is changing, and now you've got to figure out when it changed and how to get that change back out, and things got ugly, especially as they're scrolling at the same time the data set's changing. Again, RecyclerView is going to help take care of that for you. Lots of pieces compared to ListView. ListView, a widget, provided with the adapter, and away you went. Of course, building the adapter was no small measure, but ListView itself was fairly simple to use. So most people are finding that the RecyclerView is a bit more complex because it has to delegate to a lot of these other pieces that are taking care of some of the dynamicism, some of the ability to kind of stretch and grow as needed in what the ListView had to do based on your code. So doing more work for you. So I know kind of an ugly picture, but when I just stole off the internet, you can see RecyclerView is up here at the top. We've got lots of what I'll call decorator features. In fact, some of them are actually decorators, things like the item decorator, but animation and layout management, which we'll talk about, which will help improve some of the display capabilities of Recycler. But in addition, these pieces down here are working underneath the covers to help provide your data back up to the RecyclerView, take care of when data changes, things of that nature. You will have to either beg, borrow, or steal these pieces whenever you're doing a recycler as well. So yes, there are more pieces, so therefore there is more complexity. The good news is you'll see some of those pieces are actually fairly simple, or at least can be fairly simple. You can customize them, adapt them, make them as complex as you want, but out of the box, there's a fairly rich set there to make your RecyclerView and all the data that's feeding it behave much better, be much more efficient than ListView would be out of the box. So again, not a lot of code, but enough to at least make you feel like you attended a technical conference this weekend, right? So in the case of a RecyclerView, this would be a piece of code, for example, that we might find in our activity or one of our fragments. Pretty typical. Find by ID, you get your RecyclerView component. Once you've got your RecyclerView component, you're going to set its layout. Yeah, it has its own layout. In fact, one of the frustrating parts is we're all familiar with the different layouts with regard to Android. Well, the RecyclerView actually has separate and special layout manager than the rest of Android, so that takes some getting used to, but you figure it out pretty quickly. You might want to set some properties on it, again, whether or not it's going to be flexible or not. Then you have to provide an adapter, just like the ListView. You have to give it its adapter that provides its data and is managing, again, a lot of that dynamicism behind the scenes. What else do you have to do besides putting that code together? As I mentioned, you have to have adapters, and you have to have things called view holders as additional pieces. What is a view holder? Essentially, a view holder represents one, let's just call it a row, or one element, or what we'll learn maybe as you start to look at the new Lollipop features, another widget called a card, represents the data that you're going to place for the representation maybe of one object out there. One house listing or one stock quote. What you do inside of the view holder essentially is provide back through this constructor is give the recycler all the pieces, the text views, your image views, whatever makes up that row, have some way in that holder to reference all the mini pieces of that row. So essentially a holder is just a representation, as its name implies, of holding all the widgets that make up that row. You won't actually deal with this view holder after you create this class and tell it what all those smaller pieces are, because it's the recycler and all the other components that are actually going to use this information to know how to populate that particular row. Right? So it's just, if you will, a collection of what are the widgets that are going to be inside of each row. Here's the real work, the adapter, just like the real work in the list view used to be, was in the adapter. Of course, again, a special adapter. Right? I'm not saying you couldn't use something like the array adapter or something like that from the old Android widget kit, but you're going to have to really work hard. You have to adapt the adapter to the new paradigm, and that's going to be a little bit tough. So better just to use the one that Android provides, which is the recycler adapter. You'll notice it is aware of, through generics up there, it's aware of the view holder. What does the adapter do? Got a couple of methods on there. The creation, so that's usually where you want to get the data set all set up and get the adapter ready to start providing data to the recycler. You've got this method called the onBind view holder. Notice it passes an integer. Which row am I working on? And it's in that method where the real work gets done. Populating or taking for that row the data from your data set, pushing it into the widgets of your view holder. And you also have to provide a count, just like you have to do with the adapters on list view. So those are the only three methods that you have to have. Creation, binding, and give me a count. The recycler, working with the adapter and the view holder, takes care of all the other details, at least at the lowest level. You can customize this thing to your heart's content. But remember, it's now much more efficient and handles the dynamicism much better. And you don't have to do anything to really get that accomplished. In fact, let's see if I don't have the method called on there, but there is a method that goes to the adapter notifying of data set changes. And that's what's used. That single method call essentially says, okay, obliterate things and go redisplay things based on changes in my data set. I don't have to, as a developer now, worry about, well, which piece got changed and what do I do about whether or not they're scrolling or not. It takes care of all that mishmash for us. So a quick down and dirty on the RecyclerView, a very big piece, something that if you're building Android applications going forward, I'm going to bet that you're probably going to use a lot of, because we used to use ListView a lot, and this will be its replacement. Nice thing about the RecyclerView as well, a lot of additional features are built into it that you don't have to take care of. You can customize them, you can build additional, but there are some out of the box. For example, that layout that I talked about, there's a nice feature already built in. It's going to assume things are going to be a linear layout. In other words, the rows of your recycler just like the rows of a list view. But how would you at least like to have a grid where you can now at least place things very simply by providing a grid layout manager and specifying I want 2 columns to have the RecyclerView essentially say, got you covered. We'll give you 2 columns, no other work on your part necessary. Anybody ever had to try to do that with a list view? If you did, do you have scars running this way on your wrist? Right? Those kinds of small features are a really nice benefit for low cost. What else? Animations. I think I've got this set up to work. Oops. Yeah. So a couple of animations built into the recycler view is things like the add remove duration. As you're removing one of those rows, one of the view holders, or adding new ones based on data changes, you can specify a millisecond fade in, fade out type of thing. Swiping. Swiping what would be a row in the RecyclerView in and out is also fairly easy to do, and you'll find a number of open source packages out there that provide that out of the box for you. Even though it's not built into the Android libraries immediately, you can find all sorts of ones that do that for you pretty quickly and add them in. And as you can see, the code for that, a matter of setting a property out there on your recycler. So some of these features, again, make the RecyclerView not only more efficient, easier to build, but give a lot better presentation as well. Questions there? Okay, card view. So here's the definition. At least that was what Google came up with. I like to tell people what you can think about the card view from. Anybody ever remember when maybe your mother or your grandmother used to keep recipes in the card box. You ever pull one of those out, and it usually had all sorts of things on it. I know my mom's did. You know, she would paste on a picture on there. Sometimes there would be all sorts of other like notes and things hanging off it, or stickies, or a phone number to my grandmother because she could never remember how to get that stuff done correctly. So that card became kind of a tool not only to give the ingredients of the recipe, but pointers and indicators for lots of other information. That's kind of the idea behind a card view here in the new Lollipop edition, that it is a mechanism for displaying and carrying forth lots of different information and providing linkages and things of that nature to lots of different information. Brings all that together in what, as you can kind of see by definition, akin to a piece of paper or an index card that lays out into your UI. Card views are actually fairly simple. It is a new widget. You can use these card views in things like the Recycler. It really, though, is just a matter of providing something in your layout. Essentially, it almost, for those who do a lot of layouts in Android, almost looks like what maybe another layout manager type of apparatus. And that's essentially what it does, you know. Gives you ability to stick all sorts of stuff in there, pictures, text, buttons, whatever you want to do, stick it into that wrapping type of mechanism, but then take that entire card and do something with it. Simplest types of things you can do with it are to round its corners, move its elevation out, things of that nature. So that it has the appearance of being represented as a whole textual piece of stuff as opposed to just one row in something like a list view. So it's a simple widget in many respects, but one that gives us maybe a little bit better way of grabbing lots of things and sticking them on the screen so that they're all kind of seen cohesively together. Okay, another feature that is part of the material design, palette. Anybody heard of this one? Okay, anybody have to build an application that is either maybe geared towards being multi-tenant? In other words, where you're going to give the app to a set of customers, and this customer, you know, Verizon wants to put a red screen on, AT&T wants to put a blue screen on. Have those kinds of needs? Or you want to provide user preferences and let the user change all the colors. Slick little mechanism provided here through something called palette. What palette allows you to do is grab an image, grab a bitmap. From that bitmap, you ask Android to give you a palette. In other words, go into that image and drag out the most important colors, or the most dominant colors, if you will. So an API, essentially, to extract predominant colors from some sort of image, help with that set of colors dragged out to start to brand or colorize your app, or a part of your app, as you'll see here in just a second. It gives you these definitions once that palette has done its work. So now I can essentially say, okay, I don't know what color it is, but maybe based on the user's picture of their favorite pet, now the application is going to have things that are important, made vibrant dark based on what is the predominant vibrant dark color in that image. Pretty slick little mechanism. And again, one that works to pretty effectively customize the display based on user or other types of preferences out there. As a simple example, one of the applications that I've got out there in the Google Play market, one that we use quite a bit to advertise some of our capabilities at Intertech, is an application we call Vidit. What Vidit does is allows you to use the music that's on your device and bring in YouTube videos that match that music. So, you know, if you like AC/DC and you've got particular songs from AC/DC you like, you pick your song, it goes out and finds YouTube videos and then brings those back and allows you to associate those to the songs so you kind of play your favorite videos with your favorite music. What we did with that app, or what I did with that app, is you'll notice that you get an image back, a thumbnail, from YouTube for the songs that you selected. Notice how the image there closely correlates to the background color of what really is a card view. Each one of these squares is a card view. Pretty simple to do. As that image is brought back, if you're familiar with Picasso, I use Picasso to grab the image from the YouTube URL, use that Picasso image to create a palette. That palette then is used to colorize my background. So I don't have any clue what those colors are, nor do I care. but those card views are now being background colored based on the vibrant color being picked by Android for the image. Now there are some warnings, I will tell you. It sounds really neat, and it is pretty neat little technology, but you run into some cases where things like some images don't have enough dramatic change in the image to really provide for a really good selection of colors from the palette, or things get really washed out. If you provide it with a really grayish image or a black and white image, and then you try to use all the colors from the palette, things are going to look a little ugly there, especially if you've got text being displayed on top of the background color. You're trying to use the vibrant color to display the background and use the next vibrant color to display on top of that. That works great when it's black on white. Not going to look so great when it's a slight shade of gray on top of a slight shade of gray. But the idea is, in those cases where, in particular, you've got customers who want to, again, really start to theme their application set based on images or logos, great little tool built into the new material design. Questions there? What else do we have in the material design? As I mentioned, elevation is a big thing. We've seen a little bit of that already in things like the recycler and the card view. Represents a z-value, as you can imagine, determines the visual appearance of the shadow, so it provides for giving you the look or feel of the shadows underneath those things that have a higher z-value. Also includes hides, if you will. If one thing has a higher z-value than the other and they overlap, it's going to cover the other component up. Does that actually affect the view size? So it doesn't affect how you place widgets on the screen, other than the fact that if you want the shadow obviously not to fall off the edge of the screen, you have to be a little bit careful about some of those z-values, but it doesn't affect the size of your widgets. So you can essentially apply elevation to any of your view components out there fairly readily. Just as a simple example, there's an image with no z-value, one with a 15 dp, and you can see how easy it is to now associate an elevation to a widget, like an image view. Elevation.
So what is the 15 dp correspond to? Is that the height of the shadow?
Yeah, that is what they call a z-value. Now the shadow itself will be determined by Android and its use of that unit of measure. And as a great lead into that, sir, 2 dp, 6 dp, right? There's kind of a glimpse at some of the shadowing there. You can see the shadowing isn't exactly 6 density pixels wide. The shadowing is going to be determined by Android, and they'll tell you all the technology about the light effects they're going to use to determine that. But it represents a z-value that it will then determine what the shadow will be from that. Now there are some customizations. You can set the light source. Now you're getting into things that will really affect that shadow. Be a little bit careful with that. You can get into some pretty ugly UIs with too much of that. But the idea is, by default, you get a shadow that doesn't necessarily isn't represented by that z value directly, but indirectly. Other questions? But really easy to start to build into our app and start to give things a lift off the page, which frankly, that's one of the areas where, again, Android has suffered in the past. I've seen a lot of people try to do that in their own customization code, and if you ever had to try and do some of that yourself and shape things yourself, that just gets really ugly. Clipping. We used to, in our prior versions of Android, have to clip things. Like, how many of you had images that you would have preferred to see, like you have a button, and you want the button to be round? Anybody have those? How'd you do that in the past? Not a rhetorical. Everybody can answer. You usually have to take an image, right, and you put its background color to the thing it sets against, and then the actual image also contains something circular. So at least the user, it looks like it's circular, but in reality it's a rectangular square sitting on a background color that matches. That's a heck of a way to run a railroad, not to mention the fact that if they're butt up close enough to each other, you can detect that kind of thing, especially if things get oriented and what have you in different ways. Now we have clipping. You can take any view component and clip. I've done it here, as you'll see in a second, with an image, so it's easy to see and detect. But the idea here is we have something called a view outline provider. A new class where we have different methods. Once we've got our view outliner, we get an outline object, and we have different methods like set oval, set rectangle, set round rectangle, to clip things. So you can take an image and create a fancy clip on your own custom, or you can use the methods that are already out there to simply clip. as a kind of a small pictorial on that, here's an image that I have of the Chicago Cubby Bear. That's a really good example of where there's a round logo that you'd like to be sitting on a round button, but you essentially have to have it sit on a square background unless you want to do a lot of shading and things of that nature on your own. Clip it with an oval clip. The image started off as a square or rectangular, and now it looks like a round button. And you can actually, as I mentioned, take other already provided clipping capabilities in there, like a rounded rectangle, to give it at least maybe a little bit different dimension, but still have it be more closely associated to the shape you have in mind. I've seen some pretty fancy things out there. People are experimenting with things like, taking some sort of image or some sort of background and cutting a star out of it, things of that nature, to create what are some pretty fancy buttons or widgets out there. Animation is a big part of Android 5. This is a capability to which there is an entire API that's been added. So you can go hog wild and create all sorts of custom animations, but there are a lot of them already built in. And just kind of as an example of that, again, part of the API demo that comes with your AVD, you can see a little bit of that. You can do things now when you click on buttons. You might notice already, if you've seen some of the new Android 5 demos, things like buttons, when you click on them, they automatically kind of radio out. They already kind of waffle a little bit when you touch on text fields and things of that nature. So you can see a number of features are already built in to do those kinds of things, and yet you can build your own customs. There are lots of open source providers you'll find as well that are providing custom animations out there you can hook in pretty easily as well. If you're an Android developer, has everybody heard of or aware of an open source repository called the Android Arsenal? Heard of that? If not, write that one down, right? And you'll find both commercial and open source packages out there. I always bypass the commercial ones, go right to the free stuff because I'm a cheap son of a gun. But there's a whole page of free stuff for all things Android out there. One of the animation areas now is where you'll find some of the more rich and new collections of capabilities from the open source perspective out there. Right? So before you build your own animation, I would suggest taking a look at what Android has out of the box, and then go out to the Android Arsenal, or is it Arsenal Android? I can't remember which way the URL works, but I'm sure if you do a search for Android Arsenal out there in Google, it'll point you in the right direction. What else do we have with material design, gang? We have scalar vector graphics filing. So as everybody knows in the Android community, prior to Android 5, it was PNG, it was JPEG or GIF. Now we have SVGs as well. And SVGs, obviously, depending on how big and rich your picture is, if you will, can be a lot more performant, provide for a lot of that straight line drawing you may need to do. It uses the SVG Path API. I'm not an aficionado or expert on that. I had to look what the heck that was up myself, but there is essentially a standard out there for how to put together scalar vector graphics. And this is the most, I guess, one of the most popular standards out there with regard to SVGs. So how you put together an SVG image and use it now in your app. Create an XML file, like everything in Android, a resource file. And in that resource file, define the fact that you're developing a vector, if you will, a vector drawing. Here's a little bit of some of that Path API to suggest XY coordinates, if you will. In fact, that file draws that image. You treat that file, that XML, just like you would any kind of drawable in Android. So if you want to put that drawable on top of an image button, you just reference it as your drawable. In this case, the file name must have been star.xml. So pretty simple to start to develop your own graphics, scalar vector graphics, and add those now to your application. All right, that is material design. There are a lot of other features with material design, but those are kind of the highlights. What else do we have in the new Lollipop? Questions before I keep babbling on?
All of that stuff, it's all in the support library, so it's all back compatible.
Yeah, great question, sir. Great question. It is all in support libraries, yes. Is it all backward compatible? Maybe. That does depend, all right? You will find that some of these features, some of the animations, for example, some of the capabilities are not going to be backward compatible. They won't break, but they just aren't going to provide you the same visual effects. So a lot of it depends on how far back your phone is. If you've got one about as old as mine is, it doesn't do much. But if it's like a KitKat version, you'll find most of that stuff works. Some of the other features I'm going to be addressing, now those may not be available, period. You have to have the new Android 5 devices. Good questions. Others? Okay. Project Volta. Battery consumption, big issue. If you're not aware, according to the folks both at Google as well as a number of experts that I've been hearing from in conferences like this one, power consumption is one of the biggest impacts now. At least most people are claiming it's probably about number 2, next to things like price, that impact how well your application does in places like Google Play. In fact, Verizon and a number of other organizations are now coming out with ratings. Has anybody been out to the Verizon wireless rating site? I've got the link up there. They do a pretty good job of rating some of the more popular apps out there. They will hammer you if your app is not doing well on battery power. In fact, here's the latest Candy Crush saga. Gets a pretty poor overall rating, not because it's not secure or other things, but battery consumption is really rated very low. It is the thing that gets you lots of write-ups in Google Play. Take a look at your favorite apps out there, or maybe take a look at your app if you are gutsy enough to, and start reading the comments on it, and you'll start to see that if it does suck a lot of juice, that tends to be one of the things that drives poor return on your investment there more than anything. So Google knew that and said, we got to do some things to help here. Not only do we have to put some things into the API and into the system to help improve battery life, and in fact they have done that in lots of different ways, but we also have to give you as developers some tools to help you out understanding what is taking up the power, what is driving that particular cost of my app. So some developer tools have been added. They have a dump sys command now as part of the ADB. So your ADB bridge, as you'll see here in a second, can be started with a command to essentially dump some statistics out about your battery usage, or more than just battery usage. What types of wake blocks are you incurring? What types of connection issues are you having with regard to getting that GPS signal, things of that nature, and really driving some understanding about where you might be finding your app is generating or keeping battery up. They also have a battery historian UI to let you see the data you get back from the dump sys. The dump sys is not pretty, it's just text, and you kind of have to dig into it a little bit to figure out what's going on there. The battery historian provides a visual display of that gives you a little bit better assistance. Unfortunately today, it is a project you have to go out to GitHub to get, and it runs on Python. So that's a bit of discouragement maybe for some of us today. That's going to change. I have no doubt that eventually we'll start to see that even built into things like our IDEs, but it's still a little bit raw today. We also have, as part of Project Volta, the JobScheduler API. Turns out that a lot of the work you do probably can be pushed off when that phone is sitting in its docking station at night. Obviously, things like GPS are going to affect the battery probably the most, and that's something has to be up and running when your app is needed. But there are other things you can kind of wait on. That's what the JobScheduler is all about. It's an API to help really determine, based on awareness of the device and what's going on in that device, when a particular task should be accomplished. So let's take a look at a couple of these things. Also, battery saver mode. Again, some of the things that were built in as part of Project Volta are things that you don't have to really worry about as a developer. They're just now happening. Supposedly, there is over 90% efficiency savings in this next version of Android. I don't know if I buy that yet or not. If I don't have a new device, I can't give you evidence of that fact, but they've done a lot of work in terms of the operating system, in terms of the APIs to help improve battery life. Things like ability also to clock down the CPU when it needs to. Things like reducing the screen refresh rate when it starts to recognize that it's using too much power. Those are already built in, and that's something you have to, as a developer, have to worry about. But you should hopefully see that your devices that your app runs on now are getting much better in how they use that battery. Okay, so as I mentioned, some tools. That's a seeing eye chart. Sorry about that, getting pretty small. But this is the dump sys command up there at the top with ADB shell. We just have to essentially include some flags to say, yep, I want you to give me some statistics on my app. Lots of switches there and lots of capability to drag out the types of data you might need. But what you get is a statistical analysis from your app or other apps. It's always nice to check out what the competition is doing as far as battery usage is as well, or maybe one of your favorite apps you suspect is starting to create problems on your device, you can do some research on that one as well. But it gives you a lot of statistical data, and as I mentioned, there is the Historian, the Battery Historian UI, that Python tool to help give you some pictorial of what's going on there, and give you an indication, for example, where your weight locks are when you're doing your actual running of code, things of that nature. So start to pick up on some information there about what's happening. This is where I think we'll probably see more improvements going forward. It won't take long for tool vendors to realize, hey, there's data there that we can take advantage of and give you a much better representation of what's going on. So not there yet, but soon to be in the IDEs of our future. Job scheduling, again, a whole API around this to help do non-UI related work. That's what this API is all about. Now, if you are familiar with a lot of the APIs in Android, you already know that we have things like Alarm Manager and timer tasks. And you might say, well, wait a minute, I can do that kind of thing already. I can schedule work. Yes, you can, but what you can't do with either of those, for example, is have awareness of your environment, or at least not without a lot of work. Yeah, you can build a timer task, say wake up at 12 o'clock at night and do this work. What you may have a little bit more difficulty with is building something like a timer task that says, yeah, wake up at 12 o'clock at night, and if we have a Wi-Fi connection, and if the thing is plugged in right now, go do your work. Those are the types of things that are built into the job schedule. So a very nice API for your application to determine when and whether or not to do work for the user. Simple little example of the API. Again, this could be a very big discussion, a big class on the Job Scheduler API, but just to give you a touch of flavor. Job Scheduler is another one of our system services, new system service as of Android 5. Everything comes from that get system service. You have to develop what's called a service class. No, not a service like the service that you're used to today. There's a new type of job service class out there, specifically around building a task that you want to execute under this job scheduler. You then, once you have your test service created, you've got your job scheduler, you need a job info object. That object is what informs the scheduler about under what conditions should that service run. Does it have to be connected to the Wi-Fi? Does it require it to be in charging mode? Things of that nature. And then you schedule a job based on all those pieces put together. Lots of things that job info can know about. How often do you want this to run? Run every hour. What's the execution delay? How long do you want to wait until I start this thing up? What's the amount of time before starting it up? Does it have to be plugged in? Does it have to have Wi-Fi connection? Does we have to have a network connection, either unmetered or metered? Again, all the types of things that you really like to know before, in some cases, you kick off what might be a monumental task that drains that battery power. Notification improvements. One of the areas that the users are going to start to see lots of changes when they start buying their new devices. Notifications can now be displayed on the lock screen. Can be. That's not going to be at your discretion. You can code it to say to the user, I'll put this on your lock screen if you like, but the user has to opt in and say, yes, I want these notifications to show up on my lock screen. You can imagine why. Imagine if you're getting offered a new job. Do you want the thing that comes in, new email from such and such corporation, congratulations, when your tablet is sitting in front of you with your boss, right? There are certain things that probably you don't want to have happen. So notifications are going to be something that at the user's discretion can be typed into the lock screen. Developers will be able to set the sensitivity, whether it is something that maybe is a little bit more sensitive and therefore not be shown, or whether it's public and therefore be always shown. And we can also associate with that notification other metadata. The contact maybe that is associated with sending you that email. Something like a way to organize or display them on priority or other characteristics as well. And something called heads-up notification. Notifications have always been up in the status bar. They now can take up more area. They can actually kind of come down almost like a pop-up dialog, but at the top of the screen that cover a little bit more real estate for those things that are really important. So some examples. Here's what we call secret notifications on your lock screen. Everybody see it? That's good, because it's not there, all right? In other words, if you've got notifications that are coming in that are labeled secret by the app, or the user has chosen not to display them, they don't go on the lock screen. Those that are public, though, start coming up on the screen. And there's a third setting, one that's called private. I know, again, seeing eye chart here. But this one essentially says, hey, there's an application that's putting up a notification, but then it says here, contents hidden. Versus here, the actual contents of the notification are displayed on the lock screen. Right? So 3 different settings there, essentially, for both you as a developer to say what your notification is, secret, private, public. And then, of course, the user also has to opt in and says, yes, please show me whichever on my particular device.
Is that app by app basis, or is that global?
The user does it in a global way. The app does it by your settings, you'll see in a second. Now, having said that, that's one of the things that Google's talking about in some of the next releases. Starting to get to where we have a little bit more fine-grained capability at the app-by-app level. We'll talk about also now the Android device is multi-user capable as well. So that's the other thing you can do as a user is set up your mistress user and your user type of accounts and start to help provide some separation. Not that that's a great way to do it, but there's other options too. So heads-up notification, again, heads-up notification, still notifications, but notifications that can provide some priority, some alerting to the user that take up more space. So we're all used to the little icon that shows up when you have a notification. You know, and I miss those all the time. I usually ignore them most of the time. A heads-up notification, boop, it's coming up on the top of the screen. Right, so in this case, again, it looks almost like a pop-up. It actually physically pushes your app or whatever is running at the time down. Right, so your app will actually kind of get scrunched with the app limit will get scrunched when it has these come up. And you can even associate pending intents and action to those heads-up notifications. So they could be playing Angry Birds, and if a heads-up notification comes in, it slides up over the top of Angry Birds, pushes Angry Birds down, and gives a button to take them off to your app or whatever else might be necessary. Here's how easy it is to make those changes as a developer. Just additional properties on our notification object. So setting priorities, setting categories, setting visibility, in other words, setting different metadata on there now affects where and how those notifications are going to be displayed. Again, in some cases with user permissions required. Somebody was asking about, how is this set up? Again, this is something the user has to opt into, and I suspect it's going to take some of our user community a while to figure this out. I'm not sure about how you consider yourself a power user or not of Android. I'm pretty sure my wife has got the settings that were there from day one, and she's always amazed how my device can do things that hers can't. And when I try to explain to her, well, yours can do that too, I usually get that blank stare, and that's where it ends. So this may be something that some users don't take advantage of, but the idea is if you go into your security settings and you set up on your lock screen, first of all, for the fact that you have to have a lock screen, right? Our devices don't always have to be locked, but if you do have it be in lock screen mode, then once you determine that you want it to have a lock screen, that's when it's going to prompt you to say, well, what do you want me to show on that lock screen as far as notifications? So it's a little bit of a down the rabbit hole approach, so some users may not realize they'll be getting these notifications unless, or can get these notifications from your app unless they kind of follow Alice down that hole a bit. I think probably that's an area too where things will improve. In fact, there is a new feature built in the settings that I'll show you here in just a second that will help that as well. Questions there again? Other stuff that we won't have time to get into a lot of details here today. Art. Everybody heard that the DVM is dead, long live art, right? That's our new virtual machine on Android. And it really is, at least according to the folks at Google, bottom-up replacement of the DVM for lots of different reasons. Most importantly to you all and to me, it now supports different processing chips out there. Which also means, ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest problems we've always had is who likes the speed of the AVDs? Nobody loses a hand. AVDs don't always run too well because essentially you're trying to imitate what was ARM processors on an Intel chip. But now ART supports 86 Intel chip processing, which means your AVDs, if you set it up the right way, are essentially Intel on top of Intel. They can and do run a lot faster. Right? So you will find lots of help there for no other reason than just using the AVD won't be quite as painful as it has been in the past. But it runs faster also when you look at applications. There's also 32-bit and 64-bit support. Yeah, new devices now are going to be 64-bit. So you're going to find lots of adjustments there in terms of speed that you may not have realized when you were thinking about Lollipop, but won't impact the way you code your application, which is a good thing. Just-in-time compiling, again, help improve performance. Garbage collection, debugging improvements to not only help in terms of performance, but also getting that battery. They learned that a lot of the battery problems were essentially existing on a platform that was built for a desktop or an enterprise system. Not always best for these limited devices, so that's been helped out greatly as well. Most important for a developer, you get all this for what cost? None. It's there by default now. It operates by default. You don't do anything. In fact, if you wanted to build to the old DVM, it's a lot harder. Changes to WebView. They're now updatable also from Google Play. In other words, if Google Play makes changes to your WebView browser, that gets updated and your app takes advantage of it. So you don't have to do anything special to get that. But it's also an improved version of the browser on those devices. Bluetooth Low Energy API can now scan and advertise out there for Bluetooth LE. Much better networking, multi-networking capabilities. Allow also to have querying for networks, which Wi-Fi's do I have available, which meter networks do I have available, things of that nature are now available to us as well. Android TV, yeah, you can now pull up Android Studio, and one of the options you get for a new project is wearables or Android TV if you want to build those 10-foot wide apps. Good luck with that. Improved camera and video API to help improve, again, the performance, but also getting access to some of the standards that we didn't have before. Audio APIs have been improved, much better for low latency types of inputs. Better text-to-speech synthesis, things like, we can finally attach USB audio devices and use those now, so I'm not sure if the Beats headset is something that will have a USB connection on it soon, but once it does, we can start to use those on things like our Android devices. And there's a new screen capture video API. You've always been able to take a snapshot of your device or a picture on your device to give a screen capture. Now they have a video capture as well. That's one of those features, though, that you have to have a new Android 5 device to actually be able to do that. So that's not going to be a backward compatible thing, but it is going to be on the new devices going forward. So when you're working with customers, you'll have a much better way of capturing maybe errors or bugs they run into. Again, new improvements around things like the graphics and support for OpenGL. Development. Yep, we've got Android Studio, but in addition to that, we also are going to have to start getting used to, if you haven't already, Gradle builds versus the old Ant builds, which for a lot of us, that's a big blessing. We also have improved tools in there, again, based on some things like the battery savings and such that we're trying to figure out. Espresso is now considered kind of the unit testing apparatus of choice. Yes, you can still use things like Robotium and what have you, but a lot of groups, including groups like Google and Twitter, are now moving to Espresso. It tends to behave a lot better without having to do things like put a delay in to make sure the buttons have been clicked and things of that nature. There are lots of things that are going to be user perceived and that you will obviously also perceive as a developer, but don't really impact your coding or your APIs. I'm not going to take the time to go through each one of these, but hitting some of the highlights. Again, we've got a lot of material design notifications, things that they're going to see, but just things like the ability to pin an app. If you have kids, your kids ever almost deleted everything on your phone before, now you'll be able to pin an app and essentially allow them to use that app and not get to the rest of your phone. Nice feature there. Searching settings. If you go to settings down, you'll see a search button. You can type into there what you want, and it'll take you to that search setting. Again, I mentioned notification, of finding out how to set up notifications for those heads-up types of things. It's going to be a little bit difficult unless you know how to get there. Well, here's a way that helps you figure out where it is. In fact, settings is always one of those things that I have to kind of fumble with just to figure out where to get that set up. Better adaptive brightness, again, to help display. What else is there that users will see? User profiles, I mentioned. We're starting to get to where devices are going to be multi-user capable. Ability to invert colors. So if you're working at night, you can invert the colors automatically with the settings. Triple tap magnification. You can actually touch on or triple touch on the app or on anything on the screen, and it zooms in for you and unzooms. So for some of those things, that some app developers, please, if you're one of these, change your ways. I have a hard time seeing as I get older. That's getting tougher. And some of the tiny print that you've got out there is really impossible to read for some of us, especially things at night. So that's going to be a nice feature to help out. Battery stats are actually provided now to the user as well. They can go on and go into the settings and actually see what the high-end battery usage apps are on there. That might be interesting to see how long apps survive as more and more users go off to that particular screen. NFC improvements in printing. You can actually print from your device now, provided they can find or see a printer out there in some way, shape, or form. And yes, there is a new game, the hidden game. Has everybody learned how to get to this yet? So how do you get to the new Easter egg game? It's like a Flappy Bird clone is what they're saying, but much harder. In fact, if anybody scores 1 point, send me an email. I have not yet been able to score 1 point on this game. But how you actually get to it, what it does, what it looks like, actually like to multi-tab on the Android version again, going through settings to get to it. It comes up like this, and if you click on the Lollipop, it changes colors to give you your Android guy of choice color. And once you've chosen that, long press on the Lollipop. Here is the new Easter egg game that is out there. You've got to get the little Android guy to fly through the 2 lollipops. You can see my score out there. That's how well I'm doing. Good luck with that one. I have yet to see anybody actually score any points on it, so it's got to be a tough one. Okay. With that, let's see. There are some issues, some frustrations you will find. Some of the features, again, don't work on anything less than Android 5, and there's not a lot of device availability yet. In fact, some of the older devices have just been updated relatively recently, like Samsung. I've seen some of the Samsung devices. Go to the store like Best Buy and try and buy a new 5 device. Not yet. They're all claiming they're going to be out here first quarter. By my watch, that's in 10 days, and I don't think they'll all make it yet. All right, so we're going to see them this summer, but they're not there yet. Not all things are documented well, and some of the things that are documented don't exist. For example, a specification out there from Untitled Design talks about how you should start setting up more discrete sliders. There is no discrete slider. So yeah, it's really nice that we've got these design principles, but there's no widgets to support them yet, so to be coming. And yes, there's already an Android 5.1. It's out there. It's been released in places like Indonesia already, being released slowly here in places like America. So we already have some bug fixes which we have to get ready for before we've even seen our first 5 device. So yeah, there are going to be some growing pains associated with that. With that, I think we just made it in time. Got a few seconds. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Hopefully giving you at least a little bit of a flair, a little bit of feel. Yes, sir.
Do you know if the latest version of Android Studio supports NDK?
Does the newest Android Studio support NDK? It was supposed to. I do not have not been able to verify this, but when I was at the conference in November, it was supposed to before the end of the year. So I'm going to guess that it has been done, but please verify that. Yeah.
So the Android Studio I saw you is based on IntelliJ.
It is based on IntelliJ.
So right now, if I have IntelliJ like Android project, so I can use it on the Android Studio.
Yes, if you've got a latest and greatest version of IntelliJ. They based the Android Studio on the open source version. So they did fork it. So how long, and how closely those 2 forks are going to intertwine, I don't know. But the IntelliJ product is actually a superior product from the standpoint. It's got support for a lot of other features that are built in that are not even in Android Studio yet. But yes, you should be able to bring it into IntelliJ if you've got the latest and greatest. Okay. Other questions? Sir?
You mentioned there's a way to do a screen snapshot. So is there an API?
There's actually on your on the IntelliJ screen, there's actually a button there, just like you used to capture an image.
How about programmatically?
There is through the ADB. I just don't know how to do that. Okay. Yep. Good question. Others?
Do you know anything about the device owner
/ the Android for Workspace?
I have not yet seen that. It's in through settings. You can set up new accounts, and you can set up like emails on there, but I don't know from an API perspective, how do we
I think they call it
determine?
like the Android for Work, so where like you can like NFC scan it and then automatically that device becomes part of the organization. They can push apps to the device.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that yet, so I haven't seen it. Folks, I'll be happy to address other questions, but let's do that out in the hall so I can give the next speaker the time to get set up. All right? Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming up.